Are you filled with fear, doubt, worry about the future of our country? Do you feel the urgency to act before it's too late? If yes, then this podcast is for you. It's time for us to confront the critical issues threatening our nation's fabric, our democracy itself, regardless of our political stance. If you are ready to face reality, handle the tough questions, and find real solutions, then here's your host, Debilyn.
Welcome to the Terrified Nation podcast. I'm your host, Debilyn. Can we save it? Well, that's what we're exploring in this podcast series. And for me, the answer is a resounding yes. Yes, we can. And we must. Now, this show is where we're exploring alternatives to being afraid. And I offer new perspectives and framing about what's really going on. And together, we learn how to manage our fear, our anger, and even our despair. And we learn how to find hope in a world that seems or feels like it's spiraling out of control. Today's episode is about the sacredness of sacrifice, not as loss or victimhood, but as a way to transform suffering into connection and meaning and evolution. We'll talk about the role of sacrifice in overcoming fear, anger, and despair, and how this shift can create a better future for all of us. Now, I like to start each show with a question that we'll explore together. And today's question, or questions, how have anger, fear, or despair shaped your experience of sacrifice? And how might reframing these emotions lead to a greater connection or healing? Let's dive in. Now, in Western civilization, rugged individualism often overshadows this idea of sacrifice, and we associate sacrifice with loss or victimhood. But what if we saw sacrifice as sacred giving and receiving? Could our lives transform if we consciously embrace this type of exchange? And could our suffering, both personal and collective, become a path for evolution instead of this endless loop of victimhood, persecution, and rescue? Now, sacred sacrifice isn't always grand or heroic. In fact, some of the most profound examples are woven into our everyday lives. Take parents, for instance, who willingly sacrifice time, energy, and resources to ensure that their children can thrive. They may set aside personal ambitions or move across the country where family lives, or work long hours, or make difficult choices, giving of themselves so their kids can have a better life and have more well-being. And these acts are not seen as losses. They are seen as love in action. Or consider organ donors who make the ultimate willing sacrifice, giving a piece of themselves so that another person can live. These selfless acts transform not only the recipient's life, but also the giver's, because both are forever connected in an exchange that transcends fear and embodies humanity's highest ideals. By now, you may be asking, what am I suggesting that we sacrifice or give up? What suffering in the United States needs to be reframed as a willing sacrifice? Well, here's my heart's wish for us as a nation to sacrifice and give up our hatred, our self-righteousness, our worship of money as the holder of power, our conviction that our country is perfect, our misunderstanding that we are separate, our belief that others' suffering is their own fault, our preference for order at any cost. These are what I willingly sacrifice and ask others to give up for the sake of our evolution and our transformation. Now, at its core, reframing sacrifice asks us to see suffering not as a meaningless burden, but as a crucible or a seed for transformation. Human minds are wired to make meaning, to seek meaning, and without it, hardship feels unbearable. But with intention, even life's harshest trials can spark growth. As Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and author of Man's Search for Meaning, wrote, when we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. Frankl's words remind us that purpose isn't about avoiding suffering, but facing it with courage and a willingness to learn. And how are we looking inward to confront our struggles with the same bravery? Well, some spiritual traditions offer timeless wisdom here. Jesus taught love and redemption through his crucifixion. The Prophet Muhammad's hijrah, or migration, was a sacrifice for the greater good of his community. Buddha renounced a life to seek enlightenment for all beings. And in Jewish teachings, Tikkun Olam, repairing the world, emphasizes personal sacrifice for communal healing. Now, these tenets of the world's major religions remind us that transformation begins with purposeful sacrifice. But what are we transforming into? That remains an essential question. For millions around the world, survival isn't abstract. Refugees are fleeing violence. There are climate migrants. And at home here, there are those who are facing systemic poverty, and they make sacrifices every day just to live. In contrast, those of us who are physically safe often find ourselves trapped by imagined threats. We are conditioned by media and political rhetoric and societal norms, what we might call the conflict profiteers. And then we fall into a survival mode even when there's no immediate danger. And this mindset keeps us stuck. But recognizing this distinction between real and perceived threats allows us to step beyond our fear. And when we see this illusion for what it is, we open ourselves to life's sacred possibilities. So this illusion of survival pits us against one another. It fuels scarcity thinking, and it blinds us to our shared humanity. But the sacred act of giving can reorient us. It reminds us of life's abundance and of our interconnectedness. Sacrifice then becomes not this reluctant act or being put upon or feeling victimized, but it becomes a willing offering and a way to honor others and our shared existence. It's a shift that begins with enduring any hardship we may have, consciously and transformatively, asking, what can I learn from this? And instead of falling into this dreaded drama triangle of victim, persecutor, and rescuer, we can embrace a higher purpose. Suffering isn't the enemy, it's the teacher. And when we see sacrifice as sacred, we reclaim our humanity and find freedom in the act of giving. So let's draw from the spiritual leaders and thinkers like Jesus and Muhammad and Buddha and Frankl. They show us, they demonstrate that suffering, when faced with intention, can lead to personal or collective evolution. So as we close today's episode, I really want to offer you this invitation. Think about the ways that you have experienced sacrifice in your own life. And what emotions did it bring up? Take 5 minutes every day this week to reflect on the idea of sacrifice as sacred exchange. And imagine how these moments of giving, either big or small, could be transformative for you and for others. And while you do this, picture yourself in a happy, safe, and secure place. Feel how wonderful it is to live your preferred life, one where you give and receive with intention, and one where your actions reflect abundance instead of fear. This practice isn't just feel good. It is based in neuroscience because what we focus on shapes what we create. So by envisioning this idea of sacred exchange, we can create a future we prefer instead of reacting to these dystopian narratives that are pushed on us by the conflict profiteers. If you'd like to participate in a national research project to discover what your preferred future actually is, visit americanfuture.us and click on the Share Your Future Story button. In closing, I want to thank you for listening and caring enough to show up for these conversations. We may be a terrified nation today, but we can do better. We can save the USA. Join me next time.
So that's it for today's episode of Terrified Nation. Head on over to iTunes or wherever you listen to subscribe to the show. You can get advance notice of new episodes and bonus content by signing up. Head over to terrifiednation.com and join us on the next episode.